But I think the biggest brush with process was when I built an e-commerce store in Indonesia, because that's what you do when you're 25. And
Random.
The idea of staying in a stable job scared me more than leaving.
It took me a very long time to get my name out in the I mean, well, comparatively not long, because I've just been here for 19 months.
Well, I was going to say, you've only been here for 19 months, but not that very long. Hi, and welcome back to another She's the Boss interview, where I speak to women in business from a range of different backgrounds, in a range of different sectors, all with the idea of empowering you, inspiring you, and motivating you to follow your dreams and start your own business, or to grow your business, or just to be generally entertained and hearing the stories of wonderful women in business. So thank you for joining us. If you haven't already done so, please make sure you click that subscribe button. And if there's anything that comes out in these interviews that really resonates with you, then please make sure that you write a comment. So today I am joined by the founder of Shear Chemistry, Tahlia Gray. Tahlia, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
And tell us about Shear Chemistry. What is it, and where did the passion for it come from?
Yeah, so Shear Chemistry is a hosiery brand which specializes in tights for women of all shades of brown. And it's really about empowering women to feel confident and gorgeous in their own skin. So a lot of the time people ask me, so you must really love tights to start a business in the hosiery industry. And while that is true to an extent, it came from just a need that I had when I started working shortly after uni. So I studied international business at the University of Birmingham. And one of the things that really excited me about the subject is being able to travel and one day own my own business. So I had the opportunity to go to Brazil during my third year and really opened my eyes to different cultures and a different way of life, and just constantly pushing myself outside of my comfort zone. I didn't know the language, which was quite a challenge at the beginning. It's kind of like being mute. But one of the things that it encouraged me to do is to continue to push myself and be uncomfortable in order to grow. So after finishing university, I got a job in New York. And that's where the idea behind Shear Chemistry came. So I was working in an investment bank within HR, and I was excited, as well as having an amazing work opportunity, I was excited to have access to products that I always wanted but could never find in London. And tights that actually matched my skin tone was just one of those things that I just wanted, but could never find. So I started a journey to finding this basic everyday product, and being in this cosmopolitan city, I thought that finding them would be very easy. But I was actually very wrong. So it really made me question, why are all these brands out there not seeing me, not acknowledging me, not thinking that I, as a Black woman, as a woman of color, are worthy of making a product for. And so it just really made me think someone's got to do something about this, because this is something that I need and that I want to wear every day. And yet there's so many brands out there who are not catering to a huge proportion of the market. So I took it upon myself to be that person to do something about it. And because I thought I wanted to start a business, and I thought that maybe it's not going to be too challenging, because I thought, how hard could it be? So I guess that naivety and lack of experience actually threw me into it, because I thought, can't be that hard. So I was dedicated to building a brand that celebrated women of color, and that gave them the space to feel visible and valid, and fundamentally create a more diverse perception of beauty.
What a beautiful story. And it's so true. It's so very true. And I think if you're not a woman of color, you don't necessarily understand how impactful it can be to walk around in a world and be in an environment where you feel that you are not valued or you're not acknowledged. And something that seems as straightforward as tights can have such a big impact. You can't find anything that works for you. It's really interesting for those of you watching. We knew each other from many years ago. We went to different universities, but when you're in Birmingham, I think all the universities kind of and I never knew that. Obviously, we haven't connected again since. I didn't know that you'd lived in Brazil and in New York, so that's quite interesting for me to hear. How did you do that? I remember before finishing uni, I had these dreams of going and living abroad, but once I'd finished, I was absolutely terrified and I just never did it. And I think that's probably something I would always, not regret, because I don't like the word regret, but think I wish that I had tried it. How did you, well, first and foremostly, were you afraid, and what kind of helped you just get up and do it? What was it that motivated that?
Yeah, I was very afraid actually, but I didn't let that stop me. I guess one of the good things about my background that you might not know also is that I grew up in Australia.
And thinking, while she was talking, I was thinking, I don't remember having an accent.
It's something that a lot of people don't notice, but yeah, I'm essentially Australian. I was born in Australia, and I came to the UK at the age of 15. So why that's important is my parents moved from the UK to Australia in late 70s to work. Actually, first they moved to Papua New Guinea, and then my sister was born in Papua New Guinea, and then they moved on to Australia. And so I've always grown up with kind of that ethos of your world's your oyster, and not to be afraid to explore and to travel, because my parents did it and they were very happy in the path that they set for themselves, because they ended up staying in Australia for 25 years. So I think it was kind of that ability to just be like, well, you know, I've lived halfway across the world without much family, because it was just my mum, dad, brother, sister. So the ability to just go anywhere and make new contacts is something that comes second nature to me because of that experience. So going to Brazil, yes, I was scared, but I guess just building those networks, and which kind of gives an assurance policy for yourself. So I went through something called ISAC. I'm not sure if you heard of it, but it's like an exchange. It's a global exchange program where you can find internship opportunities. So I found my internship through that program, which linked me with other students who were in the city at the time. So although I didn't know anyone leaving, I was connected immediately with a network of people in the city who were native to the city and traveling, which made it a less daunting experience. So it was scary, but I had a community there waiting for me. So, and that's a similar thing that I did when I was going to New York, because you can just go as an individual, but I think finding a community that's there to support you was fundamental in, one, it being a really fruitful, impactful experience, and two, taking away that fear.
Mm-hmm. It's making me feel like I wish that I'd had more conversations with you, and maybe I could have gone and lived somewhere else, although it's never too late, as they say.
Never too late.
Wow, I've never heard of like just the concept of a family picking up and moving to Australia. Well, I've heard of that, but not a family of colour. I guess that's something that is not typical in our communities. Well, not for Australia, maybe moving to the Caribbean or to Africa, or America. So that's an interesting. What kind of impact did growing up in Australia have on you in terms of, I guess, belief systems, cultural systems, and kind of your entrepreneurial leaning?
So I've thought about this a lot, especially recently. So growing up, I actually have a twin brother. So I was always at least with one other Black person. But in my primary school, we were one of 4 in my high school, I think I was the only one, because I went to an all-girls school. And so what that really did is make me appreciate our differences. And because I've always had a very eclectic group of friends. But I think not having access to products in Australia, like not being able to find hair products on the high street, and not ever seeing any women of colour in advertising growing up, made it so much more impactful when I moved to London, because I'm like, oh wow, there's black people here. But one of the things still surprised me every move that I made was like, but there's still not any black people in the magazines, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, my expectations were quite high on all levels. And so when I didn't see these things, and when I couldn't find the products, and when I couldn't find the makeup in, like, you know, the high road, it was like, oh wow, like I thought London was like the beacon of hope.
Yeah.
Which I always, you know, always longed for when I was in Australia. And then when I went to New York, again, my expectations were really high. So not being able to find products like tights was just kind of maybe a bigger blow to me than it would have been to someone else, because you kind of have got used to not having these things.
Mm-hmm.
Although I had got used to it, I thought I was going to somewhere where everything would be different.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't as easy for me to accept these things, because I was like, you don't have these things in Australia, which is understandable because there's not a black community, but not having these things in London and not having these things in New York is unacceptable. So I think for me, it was important. And I think the entrepreneurial streak came in being able to identify the cultural differences, but it not necessarily changing the offering, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Do you think that kind of, for want of a better phrase, only black in the village experience strengthened you for your entrepreneurial career?
Yes, definitely. Because a lot of the time where I found the most success is being able to network and be part of different circles, and go to different events that are not necessarily for black women in business, or no, I'm often the only black person in the room, and that really doesn't concern or bother me. So I think just having that fluidity, I guess I have like a fluidity, I think has made things easier, because I really don't care. And I don't let any kind of level of status or affluence or level of education stop me from walking into any room, because I've been in these circles before. So I think it has definitely made me more resilient and more understanding of people in general, because I think my upbringing in Australia really gave me access and understanding of a really broad group of people.
At what age did you realize that you wanted to run your own business, and what factors do you think influenced that?
So I, funnily enough, I always thought I was going to be a professional athlete, until the last year of A levels. And I had a really bad ankle injury. So I used to do hurdles, and just basically ripped all the ligaments in my ankle. And so at the time, I realized, because of that injury, that I didn't really have the passion to be an Olympic or professional athlete, because I just didn't have that bounce back, and I didn't have what it took to push through that injury. And so I was starting business at the time and really admired people like Richard Branson and Oprah Winfrey, and just really loved the idea of being my own boss, traveling the world and making a difference in some way. So that's really what led me to study international business. And I, at the time, had no idea what my future business was going to be in, but I thought I'll work in the corporate world for a bit and then it will come to me. And so I think it was kind of that 17, 18 year period when I was like, that's definitely what I want to do. I want to be an entrepreneur, and starting business will help that. And traveling will also facilitate that process, because I knew that somewhere along the way I will stumble on a little gem, and something would pop. So yeah, so that's when I realized that that's where I wanted to go in life.
So speaking of your kind of corporate journey then,
Mm-hmm.
how did you find that, and what would you say is the greatest lesson you learned for business in going through the corporate career route?
Yeah, so I think it's actually a really good, well, personally, I thought it worked for me, because I was working at the time, my first two jobs were in investment banking within HR, and I was working in learning and development, so specifically responsible for the graduate population in the investment bank, which was great. It was great fun, but it was very demanding. The expectations and level of the standard of work was very high, and I had a really hands-on manager, but we were in a small group. There was just the two of us, and so I was given a lot of responsibility, but at the same time he didn't really take much. There was no leniency, let's just put it that way. So I learned a lot from him, and I think in terms of the transferable skills in entrepreneurship, it's just made me be able to operate at a high level. So when I am having conversations or preparing a presentation or writing something, I know what standard it needs to be at in order for me to be taken seriously. Even like sending an email and the basics around, email etiquette. I think, in uni you think that you know how it operates, but in the corporate world you really understand the politics of it all. So I think that was important for me, and just being able to navigate people within the organization in terms of who can help you, sponsors, mentors, and all of that stuff, which I think are really important lessons for when you do go it alone, because I think it is important to understand the internal structures that exist within businesses, because essentially as entrepreneurs we want to do business with a business as well as other people, and just really being able to know how that works and offer something of a standard that will be taken seriously by the mainstream.
So when you made the decision to start the business, did you quit your job? Was there overlap? How did that work?
So like I've quit my job several times now. And at the time I was working in a job that was very demanding. I was in the legal industry, and not having time to do any of my own stuff. And it just came to a breaking point where I was like, I need to do what I feel that I'm destined to do, because this is not allowing me that space. So at that time I left and knew that I could afford to take 3 months off, just to throw myself at the business and actually give it some form of momentum to push it on its way. Because prior to that, I was doing bit by bit by bit, which is great, but I wasn't really building any momentum as such. So it was kind of stagnant. So I left then, and then I was temping for a bit, but realized about a year later that I needed to get another full-time job, just because I wasn't being able to sustain myself financially. At that point, the business hadn't launched, so it wasn't making any income. So straddling being an entrepreneur and wanting to have that freedom also kind of came to a head with being able to pay my bills. So yeah, so I had to go back to work.
And sorry to interject, but I think this is such an important thing to discuss and to mention. A lot of women that I've spoken to feel that if they have to go back into work, it's a really big deal. And actually, if you need to pay your bills, if you need to pay your mortgage, if you need to send your children to private school, whatever it is that you want to do, and your business is not at a point to sustain you as yet, it's not the end of the world. Although it can feel like it can feel like it, because I've been there as well. It can feel very much like you're taking 10 steps back, but those 10 steps back can help you go 20 steps forward. And actually the finance that you can generate through a regular income can help to also finance the business. And also, I don't know about for you, but for me in doing that, I've always been very good at multitasking and planning and time management, but working and running a business simultaneously, it takes a special level of time management and organizational skills, which once you're full-time and your business is flourishing, can only stand you in good stead. And I feel that if you, for those that have kind of, I don't know if they've got some sort of business loan or they don't have bills to pay, so they're just muddling along, I think that they can sometimes get complacent and don't operate at such a high level as those who have been forced to juggle. Because when you have to juggle, you know, I've only got this window to get my work done. I have to do it now. Not, oh, I'll do it in a minute. No, it has to be done now. And I think, just as a message, don't feel that if you have to go back into work that means you failed, because it doesn't mean that at all. It only means that if you go back to work and you just don't do nothing.
I think a lot of people, and especially those that I've spoken to, really place a real burden or a real emphasis on leaving your job or going back to your job in the same vein, because leaving your job at the same it seemed like a big jump and it's a big deal and everything, and to an extent it is. But if for whatever reason you need more money, you need to go back to work, you decide that entrepreneurship is not for you, tomorrow you can literally get another job. So it is a big deal, but at the same time, I think we need to remove all the risk, because if, for example, so I will go on to the fact that after I ran out of money, essentially, I decided to leave my career job and go into something that gives me more brain space and more time. So I am currently an office manager, which allows me to do more thinking and just allows me to really do a 9 to 5, and then I am free, which my other jobs didn't necessarily allow. So I think also we need to think about how we can flex our lifestyle in order to accommodate. It may not mean not working, but it may mean, okay, you might be an accountant and maybe going into a reception role where you don't earn as much, but it allows you to pay your bills, and then the rest of the time you can dedicate on your business. So for me, and that's what this has allowed me to do, and I do. I'm in plans to phase out in the next 6 months, which means going part-time and then not working at all, well, as an actual job. But as I was saying, I think we just need to think about different ways that we can make entrepreneurship work. And it may mean taking a break. For those people who can take a sabbatical, maybe having those conversations, or then completely leaving the job and going back in 6 months, a year's time. And those people who can make it work long time, that's also great. But I think there is so many different avenues and so many levels of flexibility that I think we need to take into consideration.
So this is a question that I really want to ask, because I specialize in supporting women who run service-based businesses. And I've had a few people contact me around product-based businesses. And that's not my thing. My thing is around service. And I've also had ideas for product-based businesses, and I haven't pursued them because it just, and it's one of those say as I do, not as I, no, say as I do as I say, not as I do. Because I will say to my clients, well, just because you've never done it before, learn how to do it. But with that, I've been very scared. So I guess the question is, you had a product idea. How do you get from an idea to a physical product? Who do you contact? Where do you start? What is the process? Because that is something that's always mystified me. Like, I have an idea for this. Do I just call up someone? Do you make tights? Like, who do you call?
No, it's a really good question. And I guess for me, I kind of compartmentalized the process. So number one, once I had the idea, it was important for me to give it some form of like identity. So the first thing I did was come up with the name Shear Chemistry and register the business. So for me, it kind of made it real. And I'm not sure if I could have really been effective without that kind of realness. And then I knew that I wanted to create tights and shades of tights for brown women. So what I did was do a questionnaire, which I sent out to all my friends and friends of friends, and got a few hundred responses back, which just asked things around, would you buy a product? How often do you wear tights? Have you been able to find them? What's your experience? How much would you pay for this if it existed? And then I wanted to start compiling shades. So I thought it made sense to ask people what foundation shades they wore. And then I kind of aggregated that and had some themes in terms of what foundation shades were most popular. And then I thought that would be a good place to start in terms of creating shades. So I hung out at cosmetics counters and gathered samples and graded those in terms of light to dark, and then grouped those. And then I actually thought that I would have 6 shades, but in the end, the research showed that there would be 5 that could cater to the broad spectrum of brown skin tones. And so I then had the challenge of finding a manufacturer who could replicate those 5 shades that I'd grouped down, and then dye tights in those shades. So for me, I think the actual kind of making the shade process was really fun. But then I got to the really hard part of finding a manufacturer, which is something that I had no experience of. I didn't know anyone who'd done that before. And so it wasn't really a case of calling up someone and say, hey, I know that you've done this, how do I do it? So what made sense to me was to go on Google and make a list of all the, Google is our friend, definitely our friend, and make a list of all the hosiery manufacturers in the UK. And so I had the spreadsheet and I had all their contact details, numbers, everything, and I didn't do anything with it. To this day, I haven't done anything with it, but I went to a networking event at the London College of Fashion at that time, and there happened to be a woman on the panel who was talking a lot about the issue that she's had finding a manufacturer. Her business was a bespoke shirt company in Mayfair, and she spoke about when she was going into the American market, she was let down by her manufacturer and she had to pull her products from the shelves, basically. So it seemed right to ask the question like, hey, I'm just starting a hosiery business. I don't know, I've got this list of manufacturers. I don't know how to start. I don't know where to go, and I don't know who to trust. And so she said, funnily enough, I have a friend in the industry and I would love to put you in touch with her, which is crazy, right? Who has friends in the hosiery business?
I do not believe in coincidences. You were supposed to be there, and so was she.
Exactly. So it was just so like serendipitous that it was just like, thank you, God. So she put me in touch with who was then the owner of the largest online tights distributor in the UK, and she knew everybody. So she introduced me to a few manufacturers, and one of whom I ended up doing all my product development with. So it was literally the power of networking and the power of asking for help. And I still believe in being the first person to ask a question at any panel event, and I was
Me
that person.
too. That's
Yeah,
something I always do. Make sure you're the first or the last. If you can't be the first, be the last.
yeah,
So remember who you were, and they take notice.
exactly.
It's a
So
very
that
good.
was
You should take that on.
that was the first question at that panel event, and I think, and she had to go. She had to rush off. So had I not asked the question then, I would have missed her. So yeah, so that's how I ended up meeting my first manufacturer. It was a struggle trying to perfect these shades, because although I had kind of the samples that I wanted to replicate, dealing with companies that haven't necessarily created brown shades, they were always a bit too red, a bit too orange, and so going back and forth was something that ended up taking 18 months. And I thought it would take about 3 months, and that was what we discussed at the beginning. But I guess trying to make something that's right and near enough as perfect was just something that took a lot of testing and took a lot of feedback, and just making tweaks and changes, which is not something that I anticipated. But at the end of the day, we were able to create shades and products that really do what we say, which is match brown skin tones and empower women to feel confident and gorgeous in their own skin. But yeah, so the manufacturing process is difficult, but one thing that I also want to add, we were working with an agent initially in the UK with factories in Italy, and we had contracts in place.
I was going to say, are you trying to think of the legal way to say this?
Yeah, we had contracts in place, and we ended up having to go to another manufacturer just because of the legal requirements. And sometimes with Italian factories, is what I'm trying to say, sometimes with Italian factories, they're very relaxed in how they do deal with legal matters and contracts, and they don't always want to have one. And so for me, as a young business, it was absolutely paramount that we have a contract, because in the grand scheme of things, it's a lot of money that I'm putting down for a minimum order, and I needed to be able to protect myself. And a lot of businesses that I came in contact with was like, oh, well, we're going to make this stuff, isn't that enough?
No.
So it was surprising how many factories claimed that they don't have contracts. And so just being really wary of that, and making sure we were fortunate to have a legal firm do some pro bono work for us, so we were able to create our own contracts essentially and give it to them. But it's just something that I really have to stress to people, because I later found that the first company that was a near miss was in the process of going into administration. So it could have been very, very, very like red hot fire.
Well, and this is the thing, and this is what I try to tell my clients: if it doesn't feel right, don't do it. And I guess for you, it didn't feel right and you didn't do it. And intuition, as a woman, I think it's important. but not just intuition and I guess research and looking at the facts. If it's not right, don't do it. And I think sometimes when you're in the early stages of a business, you're in such a rush to try and get things done that you let things slide that can then have huge ramifications later down the line. And really, you need to make sure that you do due diligence. And you don't make silly mistakes that might turn into huge ones just because of excitement, and not just excitement, also lack of confidence that, well, they've been doing this, so they must know better than me. We will know, actually, if it doesn't feel right, don't do it.
And I guess it's also important to have like a good team around you. Like I have been working with 2 friends who support me in PR and finance, and I was at that time, although it didn't feel right, I was in such a rush that I was like, you know what, I'm going to take the risk. And it took one of my team to actually shake me up and shout, like she actually shouted at me. I don't think she ever shouted at me before, but she actually shouted at me and said, Tahlia, this is your reputation on the line. You cannot do this. And I was like, okay, like I'm hearing you and I respect your opinion and I'm actually going to listen, because I was actually willing to take the risk. So it was the team around me that made sure that I was going down the right path, which I'm eternally grateful for.
And that's the other thing. I think what's also very important is having the right people around you, whether that be a team, whether that be mentors, coaches, consultants, because you don't know everything. And when you're in it, it's hard to be objective because you're just looking at the end goal instead of looking at kind of some of the obstacles that you might come across. So it's really important to have a good team or mentor or whatever it is that can help you in the early stages of business, definitely.
Definitely.
Looking at that as an experience, has it made you more wary moving forward? Has your risk tolerance stayed the same, or is it heightened?
I think I just know what to be careful of, and I know what questions to ask, like from the get-go. So I don't think it's made me more wary. It's probably made me like more risk-prone, to be fair. But I just know what to look out for from like the first step.
What has been the kind of, looking back at the journey up until now, what has been the biggest lesson that you've learned from this process about yourself?
The biggest lesson that I've learned about myself, like I think I doubt myself a lot, and I think, as you're saying, there's no such thing as coincidences, and I believe that all of our experiences today are kind of setting us up for this process. And so a lot of the times I'm really scared, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I can't do this. I can't go to Italy and by myself and meet like these manufacturers and stuff. But I'm like, actually, I've done this before. Actually, I've been to Brazil and not been able to learn the language. Actually, I've like run an event in a hotel and had like hundreds of guests, which is what we did for our launch. And I've done that before, like within investment banking. And so all these things, sometimes I have to stop, full of doubt, yes, but stop and be like, I've actually done this before. And so I think it's just having the confidence to continue to push the boundaries and do new things, because we do, and I do have the experience, although it hasn't necessarily been in that same package. Also, I have learnt the power of asking for help, and just really understanding that it's okay not to know, because there's a lot of things that I don't know to this day, and just being like, I don't know, I really don't know, and I need help, because this is not something that I'm good at and probably will never be good at, and that's okay. But yeah, it can be scary, because I think especially when you know, the gram makes you look like this amazing business person, and people are like, oh, I thought you would know all that stuff. And but just having the being vulnerable and putting yourself out there and being like, yeah, no, I don't know.
Going back to your point about I've done this before and it's packaged in a different way. I think that's so important. And there's two parts of that. The idea that just because you haven't done something in this specific space doesn't mean you have no experience at it. And for some of the women I meet, especially mothers, they say, oh, I don't have any business experience. I don't know anything about business. But you manage a household, you manage a household budget, you manage schedules, you plan events, you do a lot of things in the household that actually can transfer into the business context. And I think it's really important that people understand that business isn't this magical, mythical thing that you go to university for hundreds of years to learn about. Actually, there's a lot of transferable skills in life that can be transferred into the business context. And then touching back on the point about confidence, it's funny you use the example of the event. I've got a video somewhere on YouTube somewhere about that, actually feeling the fear and doing it anyway. My previous business was an event management company, and I had a plan to do a series of events this year, and I haven't done them, and it's nearly September, and I've been trying to reflect on why haven't I done them, because I'm scared. What if people don't show up? How am I going to get sponsorship? How am I going to promote this event?
But you've done this though.
I've done it. Like, I used to do this with my eyes closed, and the fear has come because I've not done it for a while. But I had a serious conversation with myself the other day and then recorded the video and said, actually, this is ridiculous. You've done this before. Stop being ridiculous. So it's funny that you used that example. I think it's one of those things that you're always going to have a bit of doubt, and actually sometimes that doubt can be beneficial in helping you review things properly. So in me being nervous about doing these events, I've done like these super detailed event plans to make sure nothing goes wrong. Whereas actually, had I still been as confident as I was before, I could have been sloppy with it. So sometimes self-doubt can work to your advantage.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
What is next for the business? What is the stage that you're at now in growth? Where do you see yourself and the business in the next kind of 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, so I guess the first year was all about getting the brand out there, building a customer base, seeing what sells, and in order to do that, we've done a lot of social media campaigns. We've done a lot of pop-ups just to have that face-to-face interaction. But now that we know that there's a demand, people like the product, it's just about beginning to scale. So starting to sell to retail and do some B2B wholesaling. And then also one of the major factors is finance. So at the moment, we've just been bootstrapping. I did get a loan, a Virgin loan, which has enabled us to get to this stage. But just in terms of cash flow, we need a lot more. And so going to raise seed fund investment is the next chapter as well. So it kind of all ties in together. So in terms of more longer term, well, still in the 12 months to 2 years, there's some new products that are being developed. So planning on a dance tights range, and then going into things like lingerie and other things that will follow. So yeah, just continuing to build a brand and build a lifestyle brand, as well as acquire the finance to make it possible.
Sounds exciting. I always like to end these interviews with 3 pieces of advice that you would give to a young woman who wants to embark on an entrepreneurial career.
Yeah. So my first one is just start. I think a lot of the time people are like, oh, I don't have the knowledge, I don't have the money, I don't have this, I don't have that. Like, there's a million excuses that we can make for not starting a business. But I think most people who have been successful have started with little, very little, but a big dream, a passion, and just creativity. And I think that's essentially all you need. And with that, you will meet people, the opportunities will come to you, and it will just flow. It will flow. But I think the first thing you have to do is start. That is it. The second piece of advice I would say is just be clear on your why. So entrepreneurship is hard, and there will be challenges along the way, and that's part of like what makes it fun and exciting and keeps you on your toes. But there will be like extreme highs, extreme lows, and I think just understanding why you're doing this and why you're sacrificing and why you are not necessarily sleeping as much as you should or eating as well as you should, really keeps you in the game and keeps you focused. Because otherwise, like I always say to people, like unless you're 200% invested, like there's actually no point. There's no point, because you can just get a job and earn decent money. So if you're kind of thinking about it as a quick rich scheme, like there's many other things that you can do to do that, but I think you have to be completely passionate and have a solid reason as to why you're doing this. So the third thing is something that I have had to acknowledge is, if you're not good at numbers, get an accountant.
I said that to somebody yesterday who called me and said, can you help me with a financial forecast? And I need to do my financial. And I was like, don't you have an accountant? No, well, go and find one. Why are you trying to do all these spreadsheets and do all of these things if you don't like it? Find someone else. Yeah, so I took in that piece of it.
Definitely. And just someone to keep on top of all your HMRC companies, housey stuff. I don't even know the names, but someone to keep on top of that, because
someone to make sure you don't go to jail and you don't get fined. That's why I've always had an accountant. I just don't want to go to jail, and I don't have money for a fine.
I think early on I got a fat fine from not filing something, and I was like, I didn't even know it was due. But that is not an excuse that you can use when they handcuff you.
Yeah, they don't care at all. So yeah, get an accountant.
So yeah, that's really important. And I think a lot of us think that we can do all these things, but it's again, it's okay if you cannot. Just pay someone to do that. And I think that's something that's really, really, really important, because I have been fined and it hurts.
So have I, and it hurts a lot. And that's why I still have a fear if I see a brown envelope come through the letterbox. I'm like, oh my gosh, not again. And this was about 7 years ago now. But the fear never leaves.
Honestly, just get an accountant. Yeah.
No, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that you have too, and you guys watching at home. I hope you've appreciated everything that Tahlia has shared with us today. I personally feel that now I slightly understand more how this product to market process works, and there's not a special person that you just called who sorts it all out for you. You have to do it. Yeah. So thanks for that. If people want to find out more about your business, how can they do so?
So the website is www.shearchemistry.com, and it's Shear Chemistry on all platforms, so Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, @Shear Chemistry.
Fab. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for watching. If you haven't already done so, as I always say, please make sure that you click the subscribe button. And also, if you're a woman in business and you're interested in being interviewed for She's the Boss, then please email me. Also, if you've watched this and you're suddenly motivated to start your own business and you need a bit of help and advice or guidance, please also get in touch. I offer consultancy services, coaching and mentoring programs, as well as online training programs. She's the Boss Academy will be launching next year for women who want to start or scale up their businesses. So make sure you subscribe, make sure you follow on social media to find out about all of the latest stuff going on regarding She's the Boss. Thanks for watching.